Before the age of complex chemical factories, people had to get creative to protect their homes and gardens from pests. Think about it. They used what they could find right in nature's own laboratory. For centuries, this meant relying on substances like sulfur, which was often burned to create fumes that would drive away insects and other unwelcome critters. People also discovered that certain plants had their own built-in defenses. Extracts from tobacco, which contains nicotine, and flowers like chrysanthemums, which give us pyrethrum, were turned into sprays. These were some of the very first pesticides, working because nature had already perfected these bug-busting compounds. It was a time of observation and experimentation, using the world around us. As the 1800s gave way to the 1900s, there was a big shift. People wanted something stronger, more reliable, and easier to produce in large quantities. This led to the rise of arsenic-based compounds. Chemicals like lead arsenate and Paris green, which was a vibrant but deadly mix of copper and arsenic, became very popular. These substances were incredibly effective at killing insects, from potato beetles in the fields to roaches in the kitchen. Suddenly, homeowners and farmers had a powerful new weapon. This change marked a move away from natural, plant-based remedies and toward manufactured, highly toxic mineral compounds that promised a quick and final solution to any pest problem. However, this new power came with a very high price. Arsenic is, as you know, extremely poisonous to almost all living things, including us humans. Bringing these potent toxins into the home was a dangerous game. People would spread arsenic-laced powders and sprays with little understanding of the long-term health risks. Accidental poisonings became a serious concern, affecting children and pets who might unknowingly touch or ingest the substances. The very thing used to protect the home could also make its inhabitants sick. The danger wasn't just in a single, large exposure. The slow, steady accumulation of these toxins in the environment and in our bodies was a hidden threat that few people considered at the time. The lack of regulation made this era particularly hazardous. There were no clear rules about how to label these products, what warnings to include, or how much of the poison was safe to use. The first attempt to address this came with the Federal Insecticide Act of 1910, but it was a very basic law. It mainly focused on stopping companies from selling ineffective or mislabeled products. It wasn't really about protecting human health from the poisons themselves. It was more of a truth in advertising law for poisons. This meant that for decades, American families continued to use these highly toxic substances in and around their homes, often without a full grasp of the invisible dangers they were unleashing. The world of pest control was turned upside down during the 1940s, with the introduction of synthetic organic pesticides. The star of this new chemical revolution was a compound called dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, or as it's more famously known, DDT. First used during World War II to protect soldiers from insect-borne diseases like malaria and typhus, DDT was hailed as a miracle. It was cheap to make, incredibly effective at killing a wide range of insects, and it lasted for a long time wherever it was sprayed. After the war, this powerful chemical was brought home and marketed to everyone as the ultimate solution for a pest-free life. The post-war era saw an explosion in the use of DDT and other similar synthetic chemicals. They were sprayed enthusiastically from airplanes over entire suburbs to kill mosquitoes, dusted onto crops by farmers, and sold in convenient aerosol cans for homeowners to use in their kitchens and gardens. For a while, it seemed like humanity had finally won the war against bugs. The chemical industry produced an ever-growing arsenal of new pesticides, and the public embraced them. This was seen as a sign of progress, a modern, scientific way to create a cleaner, safer, and more comfortable world, free from the annoyance and danger of insects. But this chemical honeymoon didn't last forever. In 1962, a marine biologist and writer named Rachel Carson published a groundbreaking book called Silent Spring. Her work was a powerful and meticulously researched warning to the world. Carson explained how pesticides like DDT were not just killing pests. They were accumulating in the food chain and harming all sorts of wildlife. She described how these persistent chemicals were thinning the eggshells of birds like the bald eagle, bringing them to the brink of extinction. Her book painted a chilling picture of a future silent spring, where the birds would no longer sing because they had been poisoned out of existence. Carson's book did something incredible. It made science personal and sparked a massive public conversation. Before Silent Spring, most people trusted that these chemicals were safe because they were modern and scientific. Afterwards, people started asking questions and demanding answers. The book ignited the modern environmental movement by showing that actions taken in our own backyards could have far-reaching, devastating consequences for the entire planet. It was a wake-up call that forced society to reconsider its blind faith in chemical solutions and to think about the delicate balance of nature. The age of chemical innocence was officially over. The growing public concern, fueled by Rachel Carson's work, put immense pressure on the government to take stronger action. The laws that were in place were simply not enough. A new law, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA, of 1947, had required pesticides to be registered with the government before they could be sold, which was a step forward. However, it still didn't fully account for the environmental and long-term health effects that were now becoming obvious. The system needed a major overhaul to catch up with the science. The public was no longer just worried about whether a product worked, they were worried about whether it was safe for their families and the environment. This wave of environmental awareness led to one of the most significant events in American environmental history, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, in 1970. This new federal agency was given the enormous task of protecting human health and the environment. A huge part of its new power was taking over the regulation of all pesticides in the United States. For the first time, one single agency was responsible for studying the science, evaluating the risks, and deciding which chemicals were too dangerous for public use. One of the EPA's first and most famous actions was to ban the use of DDT in 1972, a direct result of the evidence presented by Carson and other scientists. The EPA's creation marked a fundamental shift in how pesticides were managed. The agency was tasked with enforcing and strengthening FIFRA, which now required that all pesticides be evaluated based on a risk-benefit standard. This meant that for a pesticide to be approved, the EPA had to determine that using it would not cause unreasonable adverse effects on the environment. This included considering the economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits. It was no longer enough for a chemical to just kill bugs effectively. Now, its impact on wildlife, water quality, and human health had to be carefully weighed in the balance before it could be sold to the public. Further strengthening these protections, the Food Quality Protection Act, FQPA, was passed with unanimous support in 1996. This was a landmark law that specifically focused on protecting the most vulnerable members of our population, infants and children. The FQPA mandated a new, stricter safety standard for pesticide residues in food and required the EPA to reevaluate all existing pesticides to make sure they met this tougher standard. It recognized that children are not just little adults. Their developing bodies are uniquely susceptible to the harmful effects of toxic chemicals. This law put children's health first and forced a complete reassessment of hundreds of chemicals we had been using for decades. Today, pesticides are still a common feature in many American households. Surveys show that a large majority of homes use some form of pesticide each year, whether it's a spray for ants in the kitchen, a weed killer for the lawn, or a fogger for spiders in the basement. The most common chemicals used in homes now are things like pyrethroids, which are synthetic versions of the natural pyrethrum found in chrysanthemum flowers. While they are generally considered safer than older chemicals like DDT or arsenic, they are not without their own risks. The convenience of a quick spray is still very appealing, but we now know much more about the importance of using these products carefully. The health risks associated with pesticide exposure are now much better understood, and they are a serious concern. These chemicals are designed to be toxic to living organisms, and that can include us. Short-term exposure can cause symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and nausea. However, the long-term, low-level exposure that can happen in the home is particularly worrisome. Scientists have linked long-term pesticide exposure to a range of serious health problems, including certain types of cancer, reproductive issues, and disruptions to our hormone systems. Children are especially vulnerable because their bodies and brains are still developing, and they tend to have more contact with treated surfaces like floors and lawns. This increased awareness has led to a powerful push for safer alternatives and smarter practices. One major effort is the promotion of integrated pest management, or IPM. IPM is a common-sense approach that focuses on preventing pest problems before they start. It involves things like sealing cracks in your foundation, keeping your kitchen clean, and using non-chemical traps. When chemicals are needed, IPM advises using the least toxic options first. At the same time, consumer advocacy groups highlight lists like the Dirty Dozen, which informs people about which fruits and vegetables tend to have the highest pesticide residues, encouraging them to choose organic options when possible. Ultimately, the story of pesticides is a lesson in balancing progress with precaution. We've moved from using crude natural poisons to highly sophisticated synthetic chemicals and are now entering an era of greater awareness. The key moving forward is education, understanding the risks, reading labels carefully, and always choosing the safest possible method to control pests are crucial steps for every one of us. Strong government regulation through agencies like the EPA provides a critical safety net, but the final responsibility rests in our hands. By making informed, careful choices, we can protect our homes from pests without putting our health and the health of our planet at risk. Consider the science.
Ready for a history adventure? Join our community. Subscribe to World History, smash that like, share with friends, and drop your thoughts below. Let's make history together. See you in the comments.